All right, so I am going to welcome Adamas Incendia onto this show, the author of Brats, A Modern Tale of Enlightenment.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I read your book a little while ago and loved it. And I wanted to take an opportunity to just talk a little bit about the book, share about the book, and maybe explore it in a sort of unconventional way. But maybe we can start off just with just something of an introduction from you, and just whatever you want to say about to introduce your book.
Okay, well, I mean, I wrote this book because the story needed to be told. There's a lot of information in there which is, I believe, very pertinent to every sentient being on this planet. But it was also my expression of my movie, my whole story. But the fusing of that with the underlying technologies in the book, of which there a number, homeopathy, Dzogchen, Chod. I mean, one would have to read the book in order to actually see it. But the theme of the apocalypse runs very strongly through the book, and this has been an ongoing motif in my life from when I was 8, and it's developed and evolved, but it still has driven me in one way or another throughout my life. So that has been a very strong guiding force in the book. But what it came to at the end was more the actual word apocalypse means lifting of the veils. And as I wrote the book, it was very much a lifting of my own personal veils to strip away the illusion of what is and see things quite clearly. So as before, it had been a more chaotic, destroy the world, build the new world view, and then it became an unveiling of my own personal processes to do the same. And as the one occurred, I saw the destruction occurring externally as I cleared stuff internally. So it was very much as within, so without, as above, so below. But yeah, so I mean that in itself is one of the strongest motifs in the book, and that, yeah, it governs it. So anyone who's interested in the act of personal unveiling, I mean, there's a lot of extreme imagery. The whole concept of chod is to destroy yourself. So it fits very nicely in with the apocalypse. I mean, the idea of the diamond warriors, the people who are willing to hang themselves with their own intestines as an image, just that level of commitment to their own process, that's who the book is really focused at. You know, those people who take up that message, who it rings a bell with. This is really what the book's designed for. It's for those people. Sure, it might have general applicability, and it's a great story in its own, but it is a message of personal liberation, my personal liberation, but it's also a blueprint for other people to use. And a lot of the technologies in the book bring out that particular theme. So this is what I've tried to do with the book. I mean, it's a huge thing to attempt, but I think it's come off quite nicely. I was pretty happy with it. I mean, it was a long process, the whole thing. I mean, I wrote it took me 6 months to write, but that was the easy part. It was like then 5 years of editing and coalescing and reformatting it and just turning it into a usable product. Because what you don't see that often is a storyline and then a whole group of mind technologies together. Normally, you have books on, chicken soup for the soul. It's like, technology on how to nourish your life. Or you get personal stories like Shantaram, which is very much just a journey with some philosophy in it. But what I've tried to do here is to fuse the two together and to create a learning, teaching document in addition with a visionary spectacle plus a really funky story. I mean, that was the vision when I tried to build this book. And it's a challenge because they don't always go together that well. I mean, often I get the critique like, oh, it drags a bit here, but I can't leave that out because I need to put that piece of technology in, because if I don't have that piece of technology, people won't understand where I'm going with it. A lot of these things for example, homeopathy, which is a part of my life, which I've used extensively and is a part of the book, is huge. There's over probably like 10,000 remedies, and each has a personality. So to try to convey that level of information in like a chapter or two, or even to convey the potential of homeopathy as a tool for liberation is radical. So I mean, a lot has had to be left out so that the whole thing doesn't become too cumbersome. Because once it becomes too cumbersome, it slows down. People lose interest. And I'm very much aware of that. Like having the need to get the information down in the book without having it drag and like, oh God, no, this guy's just preaching me. I've tried to avoid that as much as possible while still including as much of the mind tech, which I see as essential and invaluable for myself and for others. I mean, what a lot of it's not my own construction. It's taken from ancient Tibetan teachings. Obviously, homeopathy comes from Germany originally. And then the visionary stuff as well, which is equally important, but far more personal. And that stuff is written for the fellow visionary, for people who've also had their own visions and are struggling to put them into context. It's one thing to have a vision, but then like how does it fit in? And then to realize that visions change based on one's state of mind. That vision one might have had at that time might have been useful then, but as things move and as one's consciousness changes, a new vision needs to evolve, or a new vision does evolve, which then makes sense of it. So I think this is a very important point where people often cut their teeth, and there's a lot of misunderstanding that a vision occurs, a person has a daytime vision of something, and then tries to bring that vision into form, which I was equally guilty or responsible for doing as well. But then I realized, well, as I change, as the world changed, so the visions change, and there's actually no incompatibility at all. That vision I might have had 10, 15 years ago was necessary to get me to a state 5 years ago where I could actually change the vision.
Okay.
The reason, yeah, okay.
So
Yeah.
there's, I mean, it's a lot in the book, and it's a really wonderful book. But there are, for those that are just coming on to these concepts, there's a lot to understand. And like it, when I was sort of thinking about the book and just tuning into the whole field of the book, and the introduction is, this apocalypse and, kind of riders on the storm, and it evoked quite a lot of fear. And then all these concepts of, like chod and, chopping yourself up, and maybe you could say a little bit more about that. Like, what is this lifting of the veils, and what is the background of chod? What are you trying to get to?
Okay, well, let's just take those one at a time because they're both whole fields in themselves. The fear that's generated was partly intentional because I mean I do feel this connection to the apocalypse on a cellular level, so I do feel it approaching. And the whole legend of Cassandra in ancient Greece or in Troy. She predicted that the Greeks would arrive and destroy Troy, and she told everyone in Troy that this is gonna occur, and they were like, whatever, we don't believe you. And she was doomed to have seen it and yet not be able to convey it, or not be able to have it believed. And I definitely feel a lot of that in myself, because there's one thing seeing a vision of a post-apocalyptic vision of Cape Town or Johannesburg, where it's just completely empty of people and there are trees growing through the tarmac, and know that this is a real vision. And it's another thing actually living day to day. I mean, I've got a daughter now, and it's like, well, I've got to think about kindergartens and schools and all that while still running the apocalyptic movie. So there's a lot of friction there. It's not easy having vision of the future. It's something that actually generates a lot of pain, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it's not an easy thing to deal with on a day-to-day level. But the urgency I feel to convey the feeling of it's coming, the need then for people to do the work on themselves to lift the veils, and this is where the two come in. The apocalypse is the fear, yes, generate the fear, like it's coming, okay, you don't have that much time left. The chod is, the purpose of chod means to cut. It's ancient Tibetan lineage generated by a woman called Magic Labdrong, and her thing was that the only demon that ever needs to be slain is the demon of the illusion of self. So she set up the system whereby you offer yourself to everyone you've ever known. You visually chop yourself up and you offer whatever. If people want your heart, you give them your heart. I mean, visually, you don't literally do this. If people want your head, you give them your head. If they want the rest of your body, the demons or the animals, you give that to them. You literally offer it up as an offering to them, to the higher realm aspects. You give the divine essence, the purity of one's soul. You offer your nectar up to them, and in doing this, you break the whole concept of a self, which is at the center of the cause of suffering. I mean that one line, only demon needs to be slain, is demon the illusion of self. Because when you break that sense of the illusion of self and realize that you represent everything, that you are the totality of existence, the fly on the wall, the bug on the street, the pile of dog shit in the road, and that's all you, and it's all pure and it's all perfect, then any idea of suffering just disappears. Good chod practitioners back in the day, like 500-600 years ago, would be completely immune to disease. So they'd actually send them into plague areas to treat plague victims because they had so diffuse a sense of self that they could not get disease. So this is one of the technologies that I feel is crucial, and it is very available to people and very fast as a methodology. I mean, at times I've been in stages where I've been in states of complete turmoil or anxiety or agitation or fear, and I just chop myself to pieces and offer myself up. And like 5 or 10 minutes later, because the fear is based around the body and the sense of an identity and the sense of a self, once that gets destroyed, the fear just disappears. It has nothing to latch onto. The same with disease. It's all latched around this idea of like a me separate from reality, which is can get sick, or bugs or bacteria or viruses or parasites or whatever infecting me, a separate system as opposed to a singular unitary consciousness of self and everything just different colors within that. You see, the one view leads to perfect health, and the dualistic view leads to suffering and misery. So this is why I punt the whole chod thing quite strongly, because it's a very fast way through the suffering, whether it's on a day-to-day level or just ongoing attachment to the self, because that the core Buddhist belief is the causes of suffering are desire and aversion. So if you break the sense of a self, that breaks the desire aversion thing, and then there is no more suffering because we're not attached to anything. So when we lose it, we don't suffer. I mean, there was a classic story in one of the Karmapa lineage people, Mapa, who had a son who took him off to this one horse riding competition, and the son died, and he's lying at the graveyard with a dead son, and he's crying, and one of his disciples comes up to him and says, "But I thought everything was empty." And Mapa says, "Yes, but certain things are more empty than others." I mean, the bottom line there is that attachments do form, and it's inevitable. It's just the degree to which we suffer. But the idea behind chod is to minimize, and Buddhism in general, is to minimize suffering. So to get to the point where we're beyond this web of attachments which bind us into form, so we can pluck the lotus from the water. We can enjoy our cat, and yet when the cat's dying, it's like realize, well, it was time to go and let it go without too much suffering.
Right.
This is the purpose of this whole tech. The apocalypse is just the whip to get people, to drive them through the gate to get to this point. And I think it's quite useful as such, because as we look around in this day and age, and okay, I mean, there's environmental disasters abound on every level. There's mercury in the fish. I mean, you just go on ozone. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the weather's getting crazier and crazier. Alaska, it had like the hottest day ever it's ever had the other day. So the ice caps are melting. All of this stuff is driving us to this almost state of frenzy. And one of the things in the book is that agitation, this uncomfortableness, I believe, will raise the frequency in people and actually accelerate the process of dissolution. So in order for people to be able to handle this dissolution, I think it's important that they have the skills and the techniques, and chod is one of them. I mean, it's the most accessible. Homeopathy is slightly less accessible because it requires a lot of knowledge. Dzogchen, which I haven't mentioned, which is the third leg that this whole thing stands on, the great perfection is also an ancient Tibetan Buddhist belief, but that is a view. So from this, the view of Dzogchen is everything is perfect, perfect from the beginning. One does not need to alter anything. And to quote I think it was the seventh Dalai Lama, he said, "Give up the disease of effort." So if everything's perfect, there's no need to change anything. If one's in a state of stress or tension, one's automatically out of the natural state, which is perfect, and it is. So you can use the natural state as a barometer. You can use your ease as the barometer. So if one breaks ease, one goes into a state of agitation, it's automatically wrong. If you come back to ease, you can do whatever you like, and even unpleasant things. You can do things which would not normally cause you agitation or fear. And the idea is to bring all of that under the banner of ease. So for me, it was like washing the dishes, stupid stuff like that. It's like, oh, I hate doing this. But then actually sit down and actually just wash the dishes and get to the point where, like, okay, this is not an effort. This is not causing me to break my ease. And then once I've done that, then I can always do that, go back into that state, and then it doesn't have to be a hassle or an irritation. Or this friend of mine dragged me off to watch the rugby, something I was indifferent to. It's like, oh no, bloody rugby. And it was like, then I watched it and I looked at the perfection of the game and the beauty of the movement and the skill involved. And it's like, wow, I can actually appreciate this for what it is. I don't choose to then go out and watch rugby. But if I'm exposed to rugby, I can actually enjoy it for what it is. Same with food. Food's a classic one. This is where the whole one taste concept comes in, where everything is pure and everything is self, so there's no need to ever reject any particular aspect of anything. And the good one taste practitioners can be presented with a banquet and be equally happy as when they're presented with some dry bread, because it's still what's presenting in front of them at this moment. And that once again comes about back to the not suffering, which is key to everyone. I mean, that's the core of Buddhism, is about not suffering. And if one's not suffering, one's enjoying. And if one's enjoying, then no error.
Okay, so let me just jump in here for a minute.
Okay.
So I mean the whole idea of Buddha Brats is in a way, it's kind of like an evolution of Buddhism, or I mean, you describe Buddha Brats as those who know the rules well enough to break them, right? So, you know, what can you say about that? Like, about the evolution of this concept of, you know, it all goes to nothing and everything's empty. And so where's creation? Where's the value of creation and experience and in that?
Okay, no, I mean, it's a very good question. And it's actually implicit in the whole concept of the whole idea of Buddha being awake to one's natural condition, and Brat, someone who behaves badly technically. But the idea of, like, if one has reached a state of understanding whereby one can break the rules freely, there are no limits. And then even one's bratish behavior becomes enlightened behavior. It's all about creativity, because a lot of the traditional Buddhism is quite hidebound. It's quite restricted, and you do things this way, you take this initiation, you get to this point, you do this practice and get to this point. But for me, it's like, once one understands the basic concepts, like the whole chod thing. I mean, normally if one was going to do a chod thing, you'd need an initiation. You'd have to find someone who would initiate you into the whole chod ritual thing. They have a certain drum and they ring bells, and it should be done in graveyards. And I mean, it has a whole systemic iconography around it, and one is generally required to find someone to initiate one into this whole system. But for me, once I got the core concept of slaying the demon of self, whether I practiced it lying in my bed, or whether I actually went to a graveyard, or whether I went to some Tibetan Lama who'd been doing it for 100 years and was passed on, it didn't really make a difference. I got the idea, and then the application of it became an outpouring of my own creativity. And I mean, Chod in particular has been extremely creative. I mean, I've come up with all sorts of new versions on it based on, being in the 20th century and not some 14th century Tibetan. Yeah. So, it's been an ongoing journey, but it's been a very creative journey. And the whole idea of the Buddha Brats is that they're actually people who will use whatever, however, whenever, in order to further their enlightenment. So they'll break the rules. They'll do as they see fit, kind of with the premise that they're balancing on their own impeccability, and if not, they'll fall off and be punished for it by themselves. There's no need to appeal to a higher authority. There's no need to, bow at the feet of particular monks or lineage masters or. Just a second. Yeah. Who's this? How's it, Ren? Can I phone you back in like an hour? I'm in the middle of something. Okay, cool. All right. Sorry. Yeah, so the idea behind the whole Buddha Brat thing is to take existing technologies, a lot of the Buddha stuff and the homeopathy in this case, and actually just run with it. I mean, it's an umbrella thing. It's not a specific. It's not just me. The idea behind Buddha Brats is like a group of people who are brave enough and wise enough to take the teachings and evolve them as they see fit. Now, this is not a new concept. The idea in Buddhism is each person will get enlightened and then express their realization in their own way. There are examples of enlightened carpenters, and they'll express their enlightenment in terms of building, like constructing things, or shoemakers or cobblers, as they hammer the nails into the shoe, they'll see it all as empty. The nails will be piercing, will be the form piercing the emptiness. So it's not entirely new. This whole concept of each person who gets enlightened and moves beyond the existing framework, then redefines it using and incorporating pre-existing stuff. This is not a new concept. It's just being done in a format where it's more playful. One of the images in the book I use is the drudgery of the monks, lighting their butter lamps and saying their chants and shaving their heads. And, for me, enlightenment should be a joyous experience. It doesn't have to be a miserable one of duty and suffering and, obligation and hard work. And I mean, who said that has to be the way? I mean, maybe there is hard work, but if one is willing to pay the price of pain, one can actually accelerate that and get through to the fun stuff more quickly. And once you realize that it's only the ego that's suffering, then even one can't take one's own suffering that seriously. One can suffer, but one suffers until one feels one's had enough, and then one stops suffering and realizing that it's only one's pre-existing attachments that caused one to suffer. And if one's willing to let go of that and throw it away, then one ceases to suffer. So the creativity for me is very important, and as I said, the Buddha Brat concept it's a bit of a thumbing the nose at the orthodoxy, because I think the orthodoxy has, although it holds the lineage and is very important in itself, it doesn't allow that much scope for creativity with its concept. It's like, okay, you can come into our little game, but you have to play by our rules and do our things and follow everything. But it's like the game belongs to everyone. The game is liberation from suffering. The game is freedom. And once you get the game, you're free to move the players around, the pieces on the board around. There's no one. And the more, from my angle, the more one moves the pieces on the board around, the more creative one gets in terms of like, well, let's find a new and innovative way to liberate ourselves, because it's our movie, so we might as well do it as we see fit rather than as someone else sees fit, or something that worked for someone 500 years ago, which was valuable then and is a useful ground from which to come from. But once we get the ground, we can start to move and run and fly even. I mean, then the sky's the limit. So that's really where the whole Buddha Brat concept comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really loved the evolution of that, and related to that in terms of my own practice, which is really, that the material world is here to be experienced and played with in various different forms and dynamics, and that for whatever we choose to engage in reality, we get the wisdom of that experience, and that gets pulled into kind of eternal mind, essentially, or it gets downloaded from that mind. And then when we've had that experience, then you can go on and have any experience. I mean, it's basically an infinite game of, how can we combine ideas. But I do think, I think the personal journey behind everybody's sort of enlightenment, which, I mean, for me, it's about waking up to the fact that we aren't separate from reality, that we are creating reality according to whatever format it is that we choose to engage it on. But it's just such a nuanced thing in a way, because just studying Buddhism and saying, everything's empty can lead to people thinking that life is meaningless and that
Now,
there's no
can
reason to be doing anything.
can I jump in here because
Yeah.
I've looked at that particular statement at length, and it used to bother me a lot before I was a Buddhist. And the way I see that statement as making sense is like it's empty of any meaning because it's ceaselessly arising, right? So because it's perpetually changing, any moment is no more or less meaningful than the next moment. And the only moment we ever experience is this moment. Everything else is the past or this hypothetical future. So it's empty in the sense that it's always changing. So to fixate on any moment and hold it up as any more valuable than any other moment would be an error, because this is the essence of attachment. When we start attaching more value to, like, oh, I was so happy 2 weeks ago at my sister's birthday, it was so beautiful, we immediately start to suffer, because then we contrast that to the present moment. It's like, oh, well, now I'm sitting at home alone and nothing's really happening and the power just went out, and now's the perfect time to suffer by bringing back the past and saying, oh, but it was better then. Whereas if you look at the emptiness of all experiences, like, well, yes, it was beautiful. I plucked the lotus from the water 2 weeks ago, but now I'm sitting in the dark. I'll just sit and meditate. I'll pluck the lotus from this moment without falling into the mess of like, oh, I'm not as happy as I could be or I should be or I might be. Then we cease to suffer. So, the other aspect of emptiness, it's very much the binary. It's the zero and the one. The zero is the emptiness and the form is the one. So it's the perpetual interplay between the two. If you want to look at it from the sea and then the waves in the sea, the emptiness would be the sea because it's this potential pool of pure potential, and the waves are the form. So it goes emptiness, form, emptiness, form, emptiness, form. And it's always, sometimes in storms, there's more form, there's more waves. And sometimes when it's very calm, there's more emptiness. But it's a perpetual dynamic interplay between this emptiness and form. A lot of people get fixated on the emptiness, and they actually say in Buddhism that fixating on emptiness will lead one to a state of nihilism. And this is something to be avoided, and they actually have all sorts of warnings about fixating specifically on emptiness, because it can lead to this nihilistic view that, oh, there's no point in doing anything, and then we can easily move into the whole atheism or all of the more negative, non-purpose in reality, no one else out there. That's the warning there. Once you see it as this emptiness form, perpetual dance between the two, then there's not so much of a problem with this whole life is pointless, life is purposeless. Has as much meaning at any moment as any other. It's just saying, like, don't deliberately emphasize one moment over the next, because then you have the risk of becoming attached to it. So I think
And
this is
also
really,
not living in the past is what you're
well,
saying. So
yeah,
it's the
or the future.
technology of organizing yourself essentially around living in the moment.
Mm, mm, mm. And this
Um,
is one of the, let me just jump in there. This is one of the central things in Dzogchen. It's like they say, whatever you're doing, just be present and aware. That is the sum total of the practice of Dzogchen, just to be present and aware. Because if you are present and aware, then you're doing everything that needs to be done. You are in meditation. It's not like, okay, well, now I'm going to meditate. Now I'm going to be present and aware, as opposed to the other 18 hours of the day where you're not. It's saying, well, the practice is to be present and aware at every moment. And this is the challenge that we set ourselves.
so now I had this conversation, very brief conversation the other day with this Tibetan Lama. And, I was kind of interested in the whole Tantra thing and what he was teaching, and he is based in Canada. And, whatever I said, he would go back to saying, there's nothing to see, nothing to do, nothing to back to nothing type thing. And I said to him, well, I'm coming from a practice that is essentially like the other pole, which is like, let's, this place is to be experienced, and creation, there wouldn't be a material world if it meant nothing. So it's almost like the task of this modern day enlightenment is to somehow not polarize, but rather, like you're saying, to understand the technology of creation versus, a state of potential, which is really the void. For me, the void is a place of it might be empty of things, but it's not. It's a place of all potentials.
Yeah, I think
Everything
once you
exists,
see,
like a womb almost.
yeah, I mean they talk about the term they actually use in with the Tibetans is the Dharmakaya, which means the great ocean of awareness. So from the Dharmakaya, yeah, this great or bright ocean of awareness comes all form. So it's very much this it's this like sea of seething potential which is just waiting to come into form. So there's the whole idea of like pregnant just about to come into form is very strong. So it's not empty at all. It's like it contains the seeds of everything, and from that different seeds spring up and appear and disappear and then back into the emptiness. And that's the idea of the emptiness and form dance. And that is the beauty of all existence. Without that is meaningless. And to focus unduly on the, oh, it's all empty, it's all empty. I understand why people do this, to break people's fixation on form. But once you've broken that fixation on form, then to watch the interplay between the two is the reason to exist, and that's the liberation. Then you can quite happily look at the full display, enjoy it thoroughly, and yet when it gets turned off or turned in a different direction, you can quite happily focus on that. This is the mastery.
Right. So there's a lot of different questions and a lot of different places to go, and we probably won't be able to do it all in one conversation. But there's two things that I wanted to talk about. The one is these abilities that people talk about being able to gain over time. Have this. What is this diamond warrior? What are the abilities of regeneration and teleportation and all those things? So that's the one question. I'm just going to put it there. And then the other one is tied to this idea of the dissolution and what is this future Earth, and what is the vision, and how do you make sense of it all? So I don't know which one you want to go for.
Okay, well let's do them in that order. The whole concept of the powers, the siddhis, which is the Tibetan word for it, is they're seen as on the path to enlightenment. Certain of these things will occur, and they include healing the sick, as you say, teleportation, levitation, flying, walking through walls, reading minds, predicting the future, the ability to cure the sick. I mean, there's a whole range of them, and I've noticed how I've gotten various. Mine have been more like mind tech ones, curing the sick, reading minds, predicting the future. That's been more my bent, and yet I'm aware that if I was to spend like 5 years focusing on walking through the walls, I could probably do it. But I don't have 5 years to focus on walking through the walls, and it's not that important. It'd be a nice party trick, but I mean, it really in this day and age. Is it really that useful? Sure, it shows one's degree of non-duality, but there's a specific warning in the teachings about focusing unduly on the powers, the cities, because one can become captivated by them and forget the purpose of the idea of walking through walls. The ideal is that you've broken down the concept of self and other enough so that the wall no longer represents a solid thing, and then you go through it. Now, doing that, I mean, for me, I did that kind of concept with a lot of my sun gazing stuff, where I was forced to see the sun as self, and as self, obviously, as self. So if it's all self, it's not going to hurt me. So I stare at the sun, stare at the sun, stare at the sun. Oh, the initial fear of like, oh, this is going to destroy me, or I'm going to go blind. Breaking through that fear. And then once having broken through that and you're staring at the sun for 15, 20 minutes, you realize you could do it forever. But, it's just another example of breaking down the dualities of self and other in the path towards enlightenment. So I think there's a lot of focus on this because obviously it's the whiz bang aspect of enlightenment. Ooh, I can do this, I can do that, but it really is a potential hindrance. It's a nice and the teachings are very specific about this, about not getting trapped in the cities. And many people do get trapped because that's what they go for, and they get because that then builds the ego of like, ooh, now I'm a great city, I can walk through walls, and then it's actually stopping them from moving forward. But it's if it helps people to break down the sense of self and other and the dualities of existence, then obviously it's valuable. But it's people who focus specifically on doing that. I mean, for example, the Kundalini. Yeah, there's a lot of focus on Kundalini yoga and raising the Kundalini in order to get a lot of these precognitive abilities. But the idea really is to unite the base and the crown so that one is operating as a singular unit as opposed to operating from the base and the crown, two separate units, the masculine and feminine being divided. The idea behind the Kundalini is the masculine and feminine in yourself get united, and then you function as a singular entity, having the masculine skills, and then the feminine, the power and the potential. For me, that really was what the uniting of those two was about. It wasn't about gaining any particular powers or being able to read people's minds or anything like that. That was almost like the sideshow. That the real purpose of it was to be complete in oneself, to be no longer have these senses of dualities or like the left side fighting with the right side, or the mind conflicting with the heart, or the base constricting with the head. To actually dissolve all those dualities and actually exist as a single unitary organism where everything functions as it should. There's no more conflict. The left arm does not fighting with the right arm about what it should be doing with itself. It's all just part of one organism.
So did
Which
that
brings,
happen for you? Did
yeah,
you
yeah.
find big changes?
There it was radical. I mean, I was at a point where I didn't need to eat or sleep, and then I realized, well, okay, but eating and sleeping, if you're not doing either of those, that puts you way outside society. And given that I was still in society, I kind of had to train myself to eat again. It's like, okay, well, I have to eat, otherwise it's just going to be a bit weird. Everyone's going to look at me like, oh, why aren't you eating? Or like, but you're not losing weight, but you're not eating, but I'm not hungry. But so I actually trained myself to eat again, because unless I was going to go live in a cave where it would have been quite useful. I mean, you get dragged off to a dinner party and like, oh, you sit around and don't eat. It would just have been weird. So I made a conscious choice to re-engage that. But I mean, that would be considered one of the cities not needing to eat. It's like moving beyond that. But I then retrained myself in that in order to allow myself to fit into reality, because that's where I found myself. Because one of the core teachings of Dzogchen is abide completely in whatever comes up. So if you're in the city, you do city-related things. If I was in a cave, and I looked for caves in India, they're full. There's a definite shortage of caves in India. You find any cave, there's like 2 or 3 sadhus there. It's not an easy thing to find. That might have been good 2,000 years ago, but these days it's hot property. So I mean, the next question I believe was the the apocalypse question. Yeah,
Yeah,
what?
just tied to, what do you think the dissolution really means?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, well, no, this I have a lot to say on. um, this is I've run multiple scenarios on the optimal way to diminish suffering in reality and people in general, and I came to the conclusion that there are just too many people. And even with the best intentions, and, you know, if all things being equal, all the technology that was invented was shared with everyone, and they stopped spending money on, nuclear stuff and weapons and whatnot, and then actually focused that on feeding people. The cause of suffering is people's attachment to the six realms, to desire. So until that is removed, people will continue to suffer in whatever situation they're in. I mean, they can be the richest person in the world; they will still suffer. They'll just suffer in more comfort because they're attached to things, and the removal of those things will cause them to suffer. So, my vision of it, I mean, this is like a received vision of what's to come, is like a raising of the frequencies, and I see as there's more agitation on the planet, everyone's frequency will start to raise, and what that'll cause is it'll almost act as an agitating force, which will force everyone's issues to come to the fore. So everyone will have a chance to face all their issues, and it'll all be forced into their reality. And then if they can ride the whirlwind, I mean, it's a metaphor, but it is literally ride the whirlwind of their own emotions and their desires and their attachments and the whole range, their whole movie, their whole life, then they will free themselves from suffering and be the people who actually seed the new age. Which, I mean, realistically, if there's 10,000 people standing after the dust settles, it'll be a lot. I mean, I realistically don't think that many people are even required because many people carry multiple lineage strains. I do believe that nothing will be lost. So, for example, the Egyptian, the Greek, the Roman, the Phoenician, the Babylonian, the Indian, the American Indian, the Chinese, all of these are lineage strands, and certain people carry different ones in them. Now, what is important, I believe, is that all these strands get carried through so that we can have a cross pollination of all these strands post apocalypse, and that is very important that nothing gets lost. The people, almost the excess. We don't need 6 billion people. It's way too many. It's just, if you look at the cake analogy, there's just too little of the cake now left for everyone. Everyone's trying to grab little crumbs of the cake, and there's less and less cake. And as they're doing it, they're destroying the plate upon which the cake was baked, and they're trashing the oven, and they're running out of fuel to actually heat the oven in the first place. So I don't know. For me, and I mean, a lot of people take me to task on this, but I stand behind it firmly. It's the the only sane, logical, and humane thing to do is to level the playing field, to turn up the frequency so that those who can actually survive will survive, and then they'll reseed a new age based on more enlightened principles, the principles of, egalitarianism, generosity, trust. And I think if the people get through, it'll require the raising of their kundalinis, which will mean that they will literally feel the emotions of the other people in that moment as they do something to them. So I could no more hurt you than I could hurt myself, because as I hurt you, I'll feel the pain I generate in you directly in my body. So I'll cease doing it and stop doing it in general. So that is the only way I can really see the whole thing working. This idea of like, well, it was a good idea and people reincarnate until they get it. It's a nice idea. It's a beautiful idea. It's a beautiful system, but does it really work? Why are there so many people on the planet? Why have we turned this planet into our personal slave colony? We basically exterminated and enslaved every other species on the planet. It's it's unacceptable. When you look at it, it's like we have a lot to answer for, but it's no one's fault in particular, but it's just not working. So my main focus is doing whatever I see my particular little mission is, which is gathering the people who will be formative or generative in forming the new age together, or just to aid a little bit in their processes so they can be on top form when this event actually occurs, they actually come through unscathed, able to reform and rebuild a world where we actually want to raise our kids. That's my vision. Yeah.
So, what do you think about this? Because I mean, there's many different views on, what, like the two Earths, and one Earth is kind of like a higher frequency Earth body, and the third dimensional Earth, which is kind of that lower density for people that haven't quite managed to move across into the higher frequency. Like it's almost like a split. But actually, it's that would make sense that you could have multiple Earths, on top of each other, essentially, because they're all living in a different frequency realm or dimension. So I mean, what are your ideas about that? Because we do have multiple dimensional realities. Otherwise, we wouldn't have masters.
Sure. Well,
You can travel between these dimensions.
I'll diverge a bit because it's necessary for the storyline here, but when I took Iboga, I had this vision of one of the things I wanted when I went into the Iboga trip was the tantras, the weaves. Tantra just means weaves. So, and what happened in the trip was I wish for the 64 million Dakini Tantras at one point, and what happened was all the meat got ripped off my body, and these things got burnt into my cells, like as if all these 64 million Tantras were built in, and it was basically it's the secrets of how to build a new planet. So, and then further visions of like actually constructing planets. So, I mean, I'm all down with the like multiple planet version of like lesser realms where people, planet A, a B, and a C, where people learn or people suffer intensively. But, the idea of this planet that we have now being turned into a wasteland because, the people who should be on planet B and C are here trashing it is kind of unacceptable. So, I mean, if I have the ability to do this, and it's there somewhere in my bones and in my DNA, then I'm totally down with multiple planets where they would physically exist in space. I mean that becomes a matter of metaphysics, whether they would be in this physical world or they'd be elsewhere or where it would actually occur. I mean, my thought is yes, you know, Planet B would be for the good people who just didn't have the right teachings, and one would teach them, and they would generally evolve so they eventually join us here. Planet C would be for the people who had the teachings but had abused the power inherent in there, and that would be a world of major suffering. And the rest of the people who weren't even on that equation, well, you could dump them on another planet or not, or just turn them back into light so they don't suffer anymore. I mean, I look around and I see people having children, but I look at like what can actually give these children. I mean, often people coming from really economically challenged environments, and are they just bringing their children up to be someone else's servants because they don't have the money to give them a decent education, and the kid doesn't have the access to the resources to allow them to get out of it. It's a terrible thing to have. I mean, I just had a daughter. The thought of that actually occurring would make me want to rip my own heart out and just throw it away or tear my own face off. It's too horrible to contemplate, and yet people continue to engage in the suffering. But it's what's occurring now is inhumane. It's inhumane all the way around, and it's in spite of everyone's like, oh, blah blah blah. The new age is getting better. I mean, look around you. It's not getting better. There's just more people, and yes, if you were to take your version of reality from Facebook, yeah, you'd be like, oh, the brave new world is occurring. But then you go out. I live in Cape Town, and you go out to certain areas, and shoo, there's nightmare, there's horror there. There's a lot of damage to a lot of people. There's a lot of suffering, and then they aren't getting more enlightened. I mean, it's just not happening. The poverty is dragging them further down, and there's more desperation, is what there is. There's more fear, there's more aggression, there's more violence, there's more misunderstanding. And I had this discussion with a friend of mine the other day. He's like, "Oh, yeah, maybe in another 5, 10,000 years they'll get it." And it's like, yeah, but in the meantime, what they have to suffer like dogs, and be torn down and murdered and torn apart and raped and abused, and like, for what? So that maybe they get it in another 5 or 10,000 years. It's that whole system for me it's a nice idea, but it doesn't work in practice, and it's far too brutal. Why should people have to suffer anymore? Surely we have evolved to
So,
the point where we no longer have to suffer.
well, where do you think if people were wiped out or whatever, or died?
Yes.
Where do you think their souls are going to evolve to? I mean, where do you think they're going to go if it's not
Okay. Well,
evolution here on Earth in this third,
I have.
struggling into fifth dimension
I
plane?
have an answer for that too. Yeah, I believe that as the frequency raises, the people are not able to hold on to their personalities because they're just too overwhelmed by their own attachment to self. Will just literally return to light, to the five lights. They'll become essential color, and then um, they'll basically become the matrix from which everything exists. Yeah, the the color, the birds, the bees, the light, the sound, the lightning, the cats, all that stuff. They'll become part of all of that.
And who would make that decision?
No one would make that decision. It's like you turn up the volume, and those who can handle the raised frequency will survive, and those who can't don't. It's not like anyone's there picking them. They'll pick themselves or not. They'll survive based on their level of understanding and their ability to dissolve themselves, or their lack of attachment to a self or not. As long as I'm not there sort of picking and choosing, it's nothing to do with me. My mission is just to turn up the volume so that the most brilliant and the most beautiful and the most radiant survive, and the rest of them return to light and cease to suffer. So for me, it's actually the most compassionate thing I could do with my energies. Now, whether I can do this or not remains to be seen, but everything in my existence pushes me towards this. Everything has always pushed me towards this. I've just become more refined in my methodology as I get older. It's like when I was younger, I used to think, well, I had this vision of a gate through space and time. It's like, okay, and I knew it was in the Great Rift Valley, and I'd seen it. And I tried to gather all my friends to like go to the gate and go through the gate and like go to another world. And then I realized, well, later on, I realized, well, no one wanted to come with me primarily, but why should we have to leave? Why should we have to leave this planet to the people who are going to trash it? Why shouldn't they leave and it be left in the hands of people who actually love this planet, who are willing to die to preserve it, to kill to preserve it? This was the evolution of my vision as I moved along. So, but then I realized it's nothing personal. It's not like me doing this or anyone doing this. The idea of anyone's running this whole movie is equally ridiculous. The idea of this Illuminati sort of sitting there controlling everything, it's way out of control. And the only humane thing is just to turn up the volume, and the people who can actually handle that existing at a higher frequency will survive, and the rest will return to light. This is the model I've come to through vision and a lot of thought after, and it fulfills. It's compassionate, it's humane. It'll benefit the planet. It'll benefit everyone, because people will see suffering. Those who were going to get it anyway will still have their place to do it, like they'll have planet B or planet C. Those who abused their power but understood the teachings will be humbled, and then they'll return to it. And then, yeah, that's the model I'm working off.
Because what's interesting, and I mean, this is maybe a conversation for another interview, because it's probably an hour-long conversation in itself, is this idea of quantum physics and the observer effect, and how each one of us organizing our reality around ourselves will, essentially, your world vision will organize that reality for you. So it's like, for me, what I think is it's not so much a one earth that's the only earth vision, but it's more that each one of us, like for me, it's a multiple earths, multiple dimensions simultaneously, and that you might have that world emerging as your potential timeline and your potential future, and you might go to that future because that's where your focus is, but that there are many futures actually existing, because we're all downloading our own aspect of the matrix, so to speak, based on our own frequencies, our own dimensions, our own minds. And so this idea of just one earth and one reality, would be quite, it would be quite a fun topic. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I try to steer away from. I mean, the whole visionary thing, one could say, is very hypothetical anyway. Yeah, but it's very personal, and it's. I mean, as I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the particular taste of visions is so intense and so real that you sort of either wake from it if it's a dream, or like if it's in broad daylight, it leaves a stamp on you. So it's, for me, to turn my back on any of that would be unthinkable. And I mean, whether that's because I was, yeah, I mean, why it is like that, I don't question. There's a saying in Dzogchen: if there's honey on the tongue, doesn't matter where it comes from. It's the same thing. It's like, take the sweetness, take the vision, and trust it completely and run with it, not to the exclusion of all else. Like, the model you're proposing is entirely viable. I just personally can't speak to its validity because I haven't sort of had that experience. Although I have had experience of different planes, and how that all fits together, though, I can't really say. So I mean, I don't see there's any inconsistency, but I think the take-home message for me is that a crunch is coming, right, on some level, and I think people are feeling this. And unless people do something about their own relationship to their own minds and like get to the point where they feel like they've worked through the bulk of their karma, yeah, they're in for like a rude awakening when this does actually occur. I mean, it's to be prepared. It's not like one should now start stockpiling tin beef and whatever in one's pantry and lifeboats and whatever. But it's more that analogy, but taken to the mind to clear out as much junk so that if some great push does occur, one's fighting fit, one's swimming fit. So if the wave comes, the energetic wave comes, one is able to swim or surf or fly, to get through it and beyond it to the other side. So that's really my message of the whole Buddha Brats is like, okay, everyone, you know, tighten up, like get not intellectually, but energetically or mind tech wise fit. So that whatever comes, you're able to deal with it. So even if it is a physical apocalypse and there's massive distraction, one is in a good mindset to deal with what occurs. Because some people, if you strip away too much too fast, the result is the mind just collapses. They're unable to deal with it. And that's where people often go into catatonic states when the level of trauma is too great and they just shut down and it's hard for them to exit that. So to prevent those kind of scenarios, the book was written to say, okay, well, this is what I see is coming. It's like, get fighting fit. Here's some tools. It's not excluding anyone else's tools. I mean, the whole Buddha Brat vision is very inclusive. It's a call to arms more than anything. It's to the Diamond Warriors saying, like, okay, it's coming down soon, whether it's like 5, 10 years, it is actually really irrelevant. Just to get oneself to a point of optimal readiness so one feels fighting fit. So whatever occurs, you're able to roll with it, to roll with the punches, and I come back fighting. Yeah. But a lot of this, I mean, I'm a boy, so I use a lot more military kind of analogies. But I mean, it's training and preparation and all of that is more, yeah, it's always useful to have more skills. It's useful to be more fluid, to be more adaptable. All of these things will stand you in good stead. I feel the intensity of the need for this because I feel the shadow of the end approaching. Or it's not the end; it's the new beginning. But it will be cataclysmic to people's realities because if you rip apart someone's, I mean, I was just looking at photos recently or a little clip of the Ganges coming down in India and like whole buildings being swept into the Ganges. And it's like, well, that for them is a cataclysm. It's like that's the end of their world. Their entire house, all their possessions, they're left with nothing on the banks of the Ganges. And like okay, there's water, but then they'll have to find food. And maybe they've got a job, maybe not. Maybe it was related to their house. Maybe yeah, it was what do you do then? How are they then able to deal with that situation? The veil of security has been ripped away and now they're on the knife edge and like how do they survive? Do they have the skills to survive? Do they have stuff that's required by other people so they can be employed or can they build a new house? I mean all of these things. It's a crude example of what I'm talking about, but it's a valid one. So that's really what the book is aimed at. And who the book is aimed at is those people who feel this call to arms and feel this need to ready themselves. I mean, for a long time, I felt like I was a soldier. I was training, 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 training. And then I got to a point where it's like, okay, training's over. Now it's time to actually start carving my niche in reality and actually start rendering form and creating stuff around me. And that's what I've been doing. Yeah. But
I think that, because there's, I mean, one of the most important things I think in this journey is education for people and like a spiritual education so that people can understand the nuances of all these words and what is frequency and how does it relate to your thoughts and how does it relate to your reality and how is consciousness and frequency related and that there's so much of a journey in a way that people will come with so many questions. And I know that I just encourage people that do workshops and whatever to really inform themselves like as many different wisdom traditions as they can, so that they can start to download, paths of wisdom. And with paths of wisdom comes those like multiple viewpoints, and with multiple viewpoints comes an ability to become more flexible and more able to move and do that. What do you call it? The Carlos Castaneda thing. Disassemble one sort of piece of thought and reassemble something else. So you get a little bit more free. And because it otherwise it just inspires terror for people if they think that they can't move, and they don't even know how to move in thought from one idea to the other.
Yeah. I've got two things to say on that particular subject. There's actually a Tibetan saying, or a Dzogchen saying, which says, take teachings like a pig or a dog, go anywhere, and then like a tiger, go to the mountains and digest. So actually seek everywhere for information. The other aspect of that I have seen in practice is people, go a mile wide and an inch deep. So they don't actually go to any depth with any of the teachings. And they almost become like spiritual tourists, for want of a better word. They're like, oh, I liked a bit of this, I took a little bit of this, a little. So they don't actually achieve any mastery in any particular one.
Right.
Which is that's the danger of that view. Although I thoroughly endorse people grabbing information wherever and using stuff. I mean, there's so many systems these days. I mean, people are always bringing new systems to me, and now it's like the human design thing, or the pin code, or the soul, or the gene codes, or blah 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 blah. And they all sound cool. But I mean, I have a complete system. I mean, I've got the Chinese system, the astrological system. I've got homeopathy. I've got Dzogchen Chod. So I mean, I don't really have that much space for new. The whole precognitive thing, I mean, if I need it, I have ways of accessing that. So, but it seems to benefit people and give them purpose and meaning. But I think it's very important to pick and choose a few and then go deeply into those and get mastery of that, so that that becomes the base. Whereas if you just do like a 2-week course on something and then you jump onto the next thing, a lot of this information can conflict and cause confusion because they're often using different terminologies, and you want to make people more stable in their understanding, not less by
Right.
giving
And
too much
no, I
information.
agree with you. And I think that stability comes through engaging the journey, like you say, in depth, but also with the ability to have a diverse point of view, so that you can
Mm.
reference, so that people listening can listen through various different viewpoints, and that can bring freedom and movement instead of fixation and terror.
Yes, yes, yes. You know
And
what? Let me just add something quickly here. The visual, auditory, kinesthetic thing. I've often seen, because I'm quite visual and audio, but I mean, if I sense that someone is quite kinesthetic, like their touch is their primary way of interfacing reality, then if I'm explaining something to them, I'll automatically go into more feel the grasp of the wood under your feet, more terminology that they can actually understand. So talk to the cobbler in terms of shoes, talk to the banker in terms of money, talk to the techie in terms of computers as the mind, meet people where they're at. So that's where I'm quite good with that aspect. I think that's very important. So, because you can always get through to someone if you speak their language, if you want to convey information. And the onus is definitely on the person conveying the information as opposed to the person receiving it. I mean, the person receiving has to be willing to receive it, but the onus is on you if you're communicating it to them to actually give it in a format they can actually understand.
right. And I just wanted to add a couple of things, because then I think we should wrap up and maybe pick up some of these other ideas in another session. But um, is this whole idea of how people can be in control of their reality? Because obviously, I mean, this is quite a scary topic when people listen to the idea of the apocalypse and what does it really mean, and there's a lot of fear around for people that haven't maybe even started the journey yet, and your perspective can like really help people, but it's like how to even understand, for example, Chod in a way that can really access the Western mind, for example, like how, you know, what does it look like for somebody who's listening for the first time to say, okay, now I'm terrified. You know, I don't know whether I'm in control of my own reality or not. How do I begin? And I just, before you add to that, I just want to say a couple of things from my perspective, which is that I engage the path that we can intend a reality. So if we want to be a part of a higher frequency earth, that we can intend it, we can visualize it, we can download it, we can see ourselves there and do whatever it takes, you know, to dismantle the consciousness that's keeping us stuck in something that's a lower consciousness, and to even understand that consciousness and frequency are connected. So a thought has a frequency, and that some specific kinds of thoughts would keep you stuck in a frequency. So, for example, fearful thinking is something that needs to be addressed. That would have a certain fearful thinking, survival, all those kinds of things. You know, so it's almost like there needs to be more teachings around what is made available, about what is fearful thinking that keeps us stuck in maybe a lower frequency realm. And charge, I suppose, would go into that. But some people might get the wrong idea that it's about, like, you know, like you said, like annihilation of the self. But it's really not that. It's just letting go of an old identity. Stuck in the mind.
In the teachings, I mean, in Dzogchen and in Buddhism in general, they go on a lot about the mind is the wish fulfilling gem. Yeah, now this is not just like a cute little image. It's like an actual fact. You know that as you see reality, so it comes into form. They actually draw a channel from the heart, which then goes up through and exits out the eyes. So it's like as you feel it, as you envision it, and as you emote it, so it comes into form. So, I mean, this is talking about exactly what you're talking about, that ability to generate reality as you see fit, or to create or bring into form a new reality. And this is very important. I mean, I go into that a lot actually in the book. There are many examples of like where my wrong view. I mean, I'll just give a quick example just so you get the idea of what I'm talking about here. That I was swimming in a lake, this beautiful lake in Kashmir, and it's like, oh, everything is pure, everything is self. And I was like, oh, beautiful, beautiful. And then I was near where I was swimming one day. I saw them emptying a whole lot of raw sewage into this beautiful lake. That night, I felt the doubt in that moment, like, oh, it's not pure. That moment, I got sick as a dog. I was puking, diarrhea. And then the next day, it's like, okay, I got it. I got where I dropped the ball. If I'd held the view that it was pure, I wouldn't have gotten sick. But I allowed my belief to drop. And so I got sick. And that was the learning. That was the teaching in that for me. I mean, conversely, if you hold a positive view on something, one almost becomes indestructible. Yeah, I mean, there's still reality. You still don't like drive with your eyes closed, but I mean, you pay attention. But you know, a lot of people who expect horrible stuff to happen to them, it happens to them because the mind is bringing fears as much as wishes into reality. And this is a technology as well, a very important technology. And if people just can bend their head around that and see how that works, they're a long way towards moving through the suffering. And it's
Really
often people.
important. Really
It's
important.
fundamental. It's crucial. It's actually at the base
Yeah.
of everything because everyone's got a mind and everyone's dealing with the formation of reality at every moment. This is key. So I mean, I totally agree with you 100% on that. And there's a lot of that in the book about just that and examples of pro and cons where it actually occurred or didn't occur. And like with many things, the more people see it to be so, the stronger their belief in that particular thing becomes.
Right.
And that strengthens it.
There is, obviously, the journey is about learning when you're just, when you're wishing something to happen from a superficial state as opposed to deepening it into resolve. And you know, there's sort of, it's like that idea of live with the wish fulfilled, you know, and
Yeah.
anchor it
Yeah.
everything that you've got into the now, and then
Mm.
you become it. That's the
Mm.
way that you reorganize reality. And that there's that part of that mind technology that you talk about is about learning how to shut down the old programs that are no longer operating, which you also
Mm.
speak about as
Mm.
an idea.
And also just to let go of the wish once one's made it, to like intend it fully and to lock it in reality as much as possible, and then let go of it. I mean, to do it, if you write down the wish and then burn it, bang, okay, I've done it, it's done, and then forget about it, to allow the mind to get on with bringing it into form, because often how it comes into form, that particular wish, is completely inconceivable, and the more we try force it into a particular pattern, the more difficult it becomes. Where if we rely on the mind's innate ability to bring reality into form, and we just say, okay, I want X, Y, Z, and then just leave it, and maybe 2 years later, there it pops out, and we hadn't thought about it at all in the meantime. We've just allowed the natural course of manifestation to occur to actually get to the point where having a new car is a possibility in our reality, as opposed to thinking, well, I don't have the money, but I want a new car, putting in the wish, and then just forgetting about it, and then maybe one's great uncle dies and leaves one 50,000 rand or whatever, and then there's the new car. You know, inconceivable at the time, but if you let go of it and just allow the mind to bring it into form, it'll find a way to bring that wish into form. But it's often the letting go, the losing the attachment to that thing, which is what's required to actually bring it into form. So that's my little 10 cents on that one as well. I mean, I like what you're saying as well. I mean, it's equally important and valuable. I think the whole technology around wishes and bringing a positive view of reality into form is important. But one thing I'd like to stress as well, which doesn't often get talked about that much, is more the left hand path stuff. The use of, for example, anger, as a tool. They say anger becomes clarity once you strip it of its attachment. So when you're no longer attached to the anger, it just becomes clarity. Because anger is the energy of the hell realms, and the hell realms, the wisdom aspect of that is clarity, seeing clearly what needs to be done. But one has to strip away the emotion around it, which is the emotion of it is often the attachment. Yet anger is a very powerful force and often gets people to do things. So this is also part of the Buddha Brat thing, willing to use all these extreme dark side powers, in a sense, stripping them of their negativity and just using the clear wisdom aspect of it, but being willing to play with these powerful forces and getting the results from that. I mean, sometimes one gets burnt, but that's also part of the process, and that's part of the warrior ethos of like, oh yes, I did get burnt last time, but my desire to get to the other side is that strong that I'm willing to take the blows or get the cuts to go through. And my commitment to my own process is that strong that, hey, even if I break a leg in the process, I'll push through and I'll get to the other side, because it's often a faster way through.
So that's
Just,
the left-hand path, isn't it?
yes,
That's what you
yes.
mentioned, which I also
Just,
loved about the book, was the link to the left-hand path. And for me, it's about, in a way, the left-hand path is about the worship of form, and the goddess. It's part of it anyway. So
mm,
if the goddess is sort of seen as form, it's about allowing the earth to come into manifestation, or allowing manifestation to happen, as opposed to trying to go to zero. It's like,
mm,
okay, well, now you've got zero,
mm,
now you've got the void,
mm,
now create.
exactly. Yeah, it's the blank. It's the blank slate upon which you carve your reality.
Yeah, and
Just,
so, if Buddhism clears the slate and takes you to the void, okay, well, now there's infinite potential
mm.
here, now let's create. But anyway, there's so many incredible aspects of the book, and your journey and what you're teaching, and we could probably talk all day about it. But I think we're going on for about an hour and a half. I think maybe we should find a way to bring this particular interview to a close.
Okay. Just one thing I'd like to add there. I mean, just talking about the goddess there. It's from the Dakini teachings, which are part of the Buddhist teachings. Dakini just means sky dancer, and it's like the movement of all form. It's the feminine in essence. And from the Dakini teachings, they say that everything is feminine. even the masculine is an aspect of the feminine within the feminine. So this whole even God goddess thing, I mean, it all just falls away. It's all feminine. Yeah, masculine just a modified version of that. So I find there's a lot of the whole the whole goddess worship, which is kind of like a backflip from the whole patriarchal thing, but it's almost the same thing in reverse. It's like an undue focus on that. Whereas if everything is feminine anyway, there's no conflict anyway. For me, this is what the Kundalini raising was. It was like a recognition that the masculine and feminine are all part of the same thing. They unite, and then there's no more distinction. One is either masculine or feminine. For me, the feminine aspects that came out of the raising of the Kundalini was my ruthlessness. Yeah, it was the Buddhists consider compassion to be a masculine attribute. Ironically, yeah, they say women learn compassion often through having children. Not all women, but that's the general Buddhist view on things. And people do sometimes accuse some of the Buddhist sects of being slightly sexist. But if you look at the deeper Dakini teachings, it's like it would almost be sexist the other way. The men are like less important in a sense because it's all feminine. Yeah. So it's once again what view you come from that defines your reality, and this is quite an important point because from a lesser, just a quick example before we wrap up, from a lesser view, in Buddhism the lesser path, they'll say, okay, don't eat meat or don't have sex, right? Because that'll lead you to attachments. So they ban it. They take a vow not to have sex or eat meat. From the tantric view, they're like, okay, well now go into eat meat and have sex because you can use the energy of that to transform it into a higher form. The Dzogchen view, which is considered to be the highest view, is it's all pure, it's all perfect. So it actually makes no difference whether you eat meat or have sex or do whatever you like, because it makes no difference because the primary focus is on whatever you're doing, being present and aware. That's the primary focus. So there's not even the need to transform anything because it's all pure. There's certain Dzogchen texts which say even the need to do mantras or to put your fingers in particular mudra forms to chant, all of that meditation, it all falls away because the primary practice is just to be completely in the moment and present, and that in itself is an enlightened and enlightening activity.
I know
So
that is one of the points of the book, and what you said about that I really loved. And I mean, I was vegetarian for ages, and as part of my own changes, I just decided, from my sort of spiritual path and whatever, to eat meat because I could see that I was stuck in an identity, and identity is not unified consciousness. So if I've got an identity that's like this kind of metal, like hardened viewpoint, and I think that's God, that's right, that's the path, then it's already a separation. So I just decided I'm going to make a change. I'm going to start eating meat just in order to let go of my identity. It wasn't because eating meat was any better or worse. It was just for the sake of it all being God, essentially, or it all being life.
yeah, no, letting go of conceptual structures is definitely it's a pleasure. Freedom. I mean, that's the outcome at the end of the day. That's what
Quite
this
a
whole thing is
wild
about.
journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about freedom and enjoyment. And if you're free and enjoying, I mean, then there's no error. You're doing nothing wrong. Then it's as it should be. It's perfect.
So, what's on the horizon for you, and how do people contact you if they need to? Is there anything you want to say to end this session?
Um, I'm
When can
always
they get
open.
hold of the book?
My my door's always open. The book's on Amazon. There's a Kindle version and the hard copy. They're available. They can both be ordered. I think the Kindle version is $3.99 and the hard copy's $14, I think. There's sometimes the free giveaways of the Kindle version. If people want to get hold of me, and I always encourage that, a guy from Sweden recently got hold of me with some Kundalini disorder, and it was great just to actually, because I wrote the book for people to get hold of me, to actually help people in their processes, especially people who are committed to the process. So if they want to get hold of me on adamas@buddhabrats.com, that's my email, and I'll respond if you have a genuine question or are interested, or they can get hold of me. They can Skype me on adamas.incendia. That's ADAMAS.INCENDIA. That's my Skype. Yeah, that's where I am. And in terms of what I'm doing at the moment, well, I'm raising my daughter. That's kind of she's 15 months old, and that's a whole world in itself. It's been a complete change. Something I avoided for a long time, but now it's a total pleasure. But it's also fairly time consuming. But I always have time, of course, for the Dharma, and then just yeah, watching and waiting and applying pressures when they need to be applied, or yeah, waiting till the moment. I mean, it's coming.
Well, thank you for your time, and I recommend everybody gets the book and reads it and engages in these, frequencies and ideas. And hopefully we'll chat again.
Cool. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks so much, Adamas.
Okay, great.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.